Okay, we're good. We're rolling. Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Safari Pedals Show. I'm your host, Abby. If this is your first time here, welcome to the Crazy Wild Safari Zoo Crazy Podcast Thing YouTube bandwagon. It's great to have you. So before I dive into today's episode, which I am very, very excited about, for those of you who have tuned into the show before, you may have noticed that I am not in the Safari Pedals studio. What? I and the Safari powers that be, the Safari gods, if you will, thought it would be really fun and vibular to start filming the show here out of my home setup, so welcome. This is my little corner where I produce, mix all of the music that I work on. I edit all of the videos for the show here, and also I have not kidnapped, he agreed to come with me from the Safari Pedal studio, Bob.
Bombastic side-eye.
The amazing engineer Flamingo has moved in as well and will be joining me on our future episode endeavors. So with that said, about today's episode, we are continuing the amazing, the magical, the wonderful, the inspiring mini-series of 5 Mistakes and 5 Tips. Mr. Andrew Scheps is going to be on the show, and we are going to discuss his 5 mistakes and 5 tips that he has to share with the Safari-verse with all of you, and I feel like there's not much more I can add on top of that. So, please give a very warm Safari welcome to Mr. Andrew Scheps.
Hello.
Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Abby.
Thank you so much for being on. I really appreciate it. Usually I ask people to say who they are and what they do, but I assume that most people will already know who you are and what you do, a little bit more or less.
They might.
Let's get a little bit of your audio life story.
Well, if you really want the whole thing. So during lockdown, I started doing a series of interviews where I was interviewing engineers and producers, and it was amazing. And then the guys who were helping me do it said, well, now we're going to interview you. And we're about 20 hours in, and we've only reached like 2011. So if you really want to know the story and you've got 20 hours to spare, I'd say you could check those out. But the quick version is I make records. I kind of found out that being an engineer and a producer and stuff like that was a thing in high school or maybe a little before. And so I went to the University of Miami, which had a recording program, one of the very few 4-year degrees that was actually in recording in the US at that point. So I did that, where I met a ton of people and learned a lot, which was really good. And then was in LA for a bit, and then London for a bit, and then back to LA for a really long time, just working my way up. I did sound effects for post and commercials. I tuned vocals. I did everything. And then started mixing at some point, and eventually that became pretty much what I do, though I still love recording and producing when that comes up.
Diving into today's topic, which is mistakes and tips, I feel that perhaps we should start from the mistakes end so we can end on like a happy note with more rainbows and unicorns. So what are some common mistakes you see in people starting out today, which is one part of it, and also mistakes that you've made in your own career that you've learned from?
I mean, most of my mistakes do involve unicorns, not rainbows so much. So it's, we're going to start with that. It's tough to say, really. I think that the biggest mistakes are not like, oh, you did something wrong, or back in the tape days, you erased something. Though if I had erased a song, then that would have been my biggest mistake I ever made. It's more about understanding how sessions go and what your role actually is. And I was interning at a studio in Palo Alto up near San Francisco. It was a summer in between my 3rd and 4th year of college, I think. And I got to assist on a session. And that was one of the first sessions. Like, I was the assistant at that studio. I was, following other people around. I was doing it. And the producer was great, really great engineer. And I got in there and I was so excited that I was like, suggestions. And fortunately, the producer was really cool, because he kind of made it obvious that, like, just sit around, don't do that anymore. And then he took me out to dinner and kind of said, look, man, that's not cool. You might even have good ideas, but it doesn't matter. That's not your job. And it just makes things confusing. And if you've got an idea that you think is amazing, tell me, and then I can decide whether or not we bring it into the session or whatever. And he was really nice about it, but that's a mistake people usually make when they're starting out. And it might not be as specific as that because there aren't nearly as many sessions where you are in a studio and you have a particular role. But it's basically showing up and not understanding what your job is in the session. And sometimes that can be cool. You'll have some input that you wouldn't necessarily have had, if you just stayed within your box. But it can also just get really confusing, and it can also step on other people. And that's not good. There's a hierarchy that the artist is at the top, and if you have all these roles filled, then you got the producer, then the engineer, then the assistant. You should just have ideas that you give to the person one above you, and they might take credit for them or they might just squash them. It doesn't matter, but you got to understand that.
When he took you out to dinner and told you that, did you take it hard? Like, was it like a bit of a shock to you?
No, it wasn't a shock. I mean, I kind of knew immediately when it was I don't even remember how he did it, but he was very subtle about it during the session. And I just felt like an idiot. How would I not know that? Like, that should be obvious that you are somewhere in the hierarchy and you need to do that and it's not because you might not have good ideas, and it's not because they want to keep you down or anything like that. It's just, you can't have 7 people with ideas telling the guitar player while he's trying to do an overdub how you think it should work. Like, that it can't happen. They have ideas, the band has ideas, and then you got one other person in the room who's allowed to have ideas, and you're not it. So don't do it. So I don't enjoy messing up in public, and so that's one of the things I will still go over in my head sometimes. But fortunately, it was handled really well, because it could have been handled in front of everybody with a lot of profanity, and that wouldn't have been as good.
Yeah, that would have been less unicorns.
Yeah, that would have been none unicorns.
No unicorns, and certainly no rainbows. Is that mistake that you made then, would you say that that's the most common mistake you see nowadays with people that are just starting out?
I think it's a combination of that and acting like you know more maybe than you do, even if you think you do. And also with younger engineers and producers, there's this idea that if you can run the gear or the software better than the person who's one step up from you in the session, it's like, well, what the hell? What's that person doing with that job? Like, I can do that. And I had plenty of sessions where I could run Pro Tools way better than the engineer, and some where the engineer couldn't run it at all. And you start to think like, well, I should have that job, but it's not about that. I mean, running the gear is a given, and it doesn't give you a position in a session. And it really is about your ability to work on the music. And that falls under the very broad category, which is my biggest piece of advice to anybody who wants to work with other people, well, in any position, but certainly in music, is don't be a dick. Someone actually gave me a coffee mug with that on it, because that's my main piece of advice. You want to be someone that people want to be in the room with. And then on top of that, you should probably be someone who can do your job. But if they don't want to be in the room with you, it doesn't matter how good you are at running Pro Tools or Logic or engineering. It just, people don't want to be with you.
In response to that, I want a mug like that, and I will get myself a mug like that. That sounds wonderful.
I believe it has a rainbow on it, actually.
And I'll even just like shove a unicorn sticker on there for extra effect.
Yeah.
That's a great studio mug. Are there any other mistakes you really want to call attention to?
I mean, they all kind of fall into that category. I think one thing is that if you're in a session and there's something that needs to happen that it turns out you're not quite sure how to do it, or you don't know the software or the compressor or the patch bay or whatever, make sure that by like the time the session starts the next day, you absolutely know whatever that is inside out. There's nothing worse than being at a studio and someone doesn't really know how to do something because there's never been a session like that there before. And then when you come back, they still don't know it. Like, that's just lame. You want to know everything about everything so that when it comes up, you're good and you don't stop the flow of the session, because that's the whole point, is that the creativity happens at any time, and if you miss it or you get in the way of it, that's a huge being a dick thing.
Do you see that, besides the people that are just assholes and dicks and whatever words they may be, do you think, like, do you see that sometimes comes from a place of being afraid to ask?
Yeah, but when it's been pointed out to you that there's something you don't know, well, now you absolutely have to ask. Now, you may not ask the person who is running the session because it's not necessarily their job to teach you, but you figure it out. And if you got to ask somebody or look it up on the internet or whatever it is, somebody knows, because it's something that gets used in sessions, whether it's the patch bay or software or whatever. So it's not like nobody on the planet knows. So you have to find out. And you have to want to find out. Like, that should be really obvious. Not that, well, you think that was stupid, so who cares? Like, it doesn't matter what you think at that point if your job is to do that sort of thing. It's all the same thing. I'm just saying the same stuff with different words over and over. It really is just understanding what it is you're supposed to do and realizing what you don't know.
So going into more of like because like there were mistakes combined with tips and everything that you said. Do you have another piece of advice, something separate that you'd want to also say to people in the beginning of their journey? Maybe a lesson they can learn from something that has happened to you? The
great thing is that now anybody with a laptop has a studio and can make a record. That's brilliant. I mean, Greg Wells posted a video of some song that he recorded completely using the built-in mic on a MacBook Pro, and it sounded amazing. So you have a studio that fits in a little tiny bag, that big. So you need to use it. That's it. The only way to get better at anything is just to do it more. So don't wait for gigs to come to you. Go to gigs, musicians you like, go up to them and say, hey, let's record something. And if they say no, fine. But you'd be surprised by how many times they'll say yes, because you want to record something with them and they need stuff recorded. And you work it out and you do it with artists who are kind of in the same point of their career as you are in yours. And you're very likely to be able to do it. You're going to be allowed to learn on the job because it isn't some established band that's done lots of stuff before, whatever. And you just have to practice. The 10,000 hours thing is, okay, fine. If you spend 10,000 hours doing something, you probably are getting better, but you need to do it. I don't remember which podcast, but I do remember hearing you say somewhere on this wonderful internet about not taking on gigs and things that you're not ready for. Yeah, which it can be really hard because, of course, if you're not ready for it, it means it's probably a pretty cool gig that's advanced past your level. But the reason for that is you might be able to handle it. I mean, I would go into situations that I wasn't necessarily ready for. Like, I would say yes, but by the time I actually walked in the door, I hadn't slept since I said yes until I got there to make sure I was as close. Well, I would sleep a bit because lack of sleep makes you stupid. But I would make sure that I was as ready as I could possibly be without having experienced it. So you can say yes if you're not quite ready, but get ready immediately. The reason is when you don't have a body of work, if you flame out in front of people and they start telling people, then it's going to be really, really hard to get more work. That's the reason not to do it. You want to be a little bit over your head. I mean, there's a great David Bowie quote about just the way he ran his career was to always be in sight of the shore, but in water deep enough that he couldn't stand up. And I think that's a great way to think about it because you're not completely unsafe. You're not in the middle of the ocean, but you're always pushing yourself past where you'd be comfortable. So that's good. But going into something that you absolutely can't do, it can only go badly. You're not going to magically figure out how to do something you don't have a clue about by showing up in the room. And yeah, so that's what that is about.
Yeah, and I'm sure that it's even worse because the gig that you're taking on that you're not ready for, I'm sure they have expectations and things that they're used to, levels they're used to operating at. So
yeah. And you can get good fast. I mean, if you're talking about software and a few microphones, I mean, you can figure that out. You don't have to go to a major studio to learn that stuff. And you got the internet. The only thing I would say, and it's the word you've been using, is any video on the internet that says tips or tricks, don't watch it. Because there are tips, like this is like career advice, sure. There are no tips, there are no tricks, there's no magic, there's no voodoo, there are no unicorns inside of a Fairchild. Like, it's all knowable, which means it's learnable, which means you can learn it. There's talent and the way you hear things and whatever, but the nuts and bolts of it, which is what you're hired to do if you're a producer and engineer, you can learn it.
I love how you said there's no unicorns inside of a Fairchild. That was a great piece of advice. That line stuck out to me, I will say.
There are people who believe that there are.
Really? You think so?
Oh, God, yeah. Yeah. Well, it's like anything, oh, man, my record would be so much better if I just had fill in the blank, this plugin or that piece of gear or this microphone. And like, okay, maybe something would be different, but there are people who've made records with SM57s and a 4-track cassette deck that are awesome. Well, I mean, the Fairchild is great, but it's not magic. It sounds the way it does because of the electronics inside of it, and that's the end of it, as does every other piece of gear, and as does every plugin sound the way it does because of the code somebody wrote. I mean, that's it. Look, there are two phrases that are the answer to most questions about being in the music business. One of them is don't be a dick. And the other one is that the only thing that matters is what comes out of the speakers. That's it. That's the answer to every single question about engineering and mixing and producing, is that. Nobody cares what you used, how you did it, how long it took, who played what. They listen to something and they like it or they don't. So for the making of the records, it's don't be a dick. And for the finishing the record and it going out into the world, it's that it just matters what happens when you hit play. It's
like, it's so incredible to hear a short answer because I feel like, at least on like the internet side of things, like there's so many videos about just being stuck on like the what you use technicalities spot. So it's nice to hear like, guys, it doesn't effing matter really.
What it is, and I think this is what's kind of important about it, is that you can use anything you want. I would never say, don't use Fairchilds. Fairchilds are awesome. Like, they're great. And if they're in a studio, use them. But use whatever it is that makes you happy. And don't lust after stuff that you don't have. Because what you want is to be creative. You want to be like, yes, I can make this sound like this, which is what I have in my head. Like, that's the point. So if having a bunch of analog gear is what makes that happen, great. If having some hybrid setup, great. If having a laptop that you can just unplug some cables and go out the door and it's the same rig as when you're at home, that's great too. And that's what I've got. That's what's going on. But I used to have consoles and a bunch of gear. And, it does. What the point is that it doesn't matter what you use because no one should tell you what to use. And you should never, ever, ever, ever feel that you can't do well without stuff that you don't have, because then you're just making excuses.
That was incredible. I feel very inspired, I will say. And when you say that, I'll edit in like some nice dramatic violins or something kind of nice. And
yeah, some dramatic violins would be great right there.
Would you like a cello?
Not violins.
Just a violin.
No, just violins.
Oh, violin.
That was supposed to be a very quick joke and you blew it.
I messed it up so badly, so I might have to edit it out so I don't humiliate myself in front of the internet. I guess, guys, that sums up our tips and mistakes segment.
I make mistakes. And that'll be like a minute and a half with some music on it, right?
Yeah. Wow. I'm already like concocting a dramatic edit. That was I really didn't expect that, but it was pretty magical.
Awesome. Kind of like the really bright purple light behind you is rather magical.
Yes, a little too magical.
Yeah, slightly.
Thank you so much again for being on the show. I really appreciate it.
Thanks. Yeah, good to see it.
Thank you so much.
All right, see ya.